What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. This week we saw the release of Zaahen's lore on the Universe website, so I think it's finally time to piece together everything we know about him. In this video I will also include some comments from Zaahen's writer, Riot Orchidian, but do keep in mind that some of these are just her current personal thoughts and might not be reflected in the lore we get in the future. I also recommend watching my video on Zaahen's voice lines, because while here I'll be focusing more on his history, in this video you can really get a sense for his personality and who he is as a character. Let's not waste any more time and dive in. This is everything we know about Zaahen, the Unsundred. We don't know much about Zaahen's life before he ascended, but in the Twilight's end cinematic we can see what he used to look like. From his story we learn that Zaahen was involved in the Ascension rituals of Shurima, the same rituals that turn mere mortals into powerful godlike beings known as the Sunborn, the god warriors of Shurima. The Sun Priests of Shurima were the ones that chose who got to ascend, and it was also them who prepared and executed the rituals. It's possible that Zaahen was a Sun Priest, but we don't know for sure, though it's worth noting that in ancient Egypt some priests did shave their heads, and that might have been the inspiration behind Zaahen's human appearance. We know that, as a mortal, Zaahen was present in the Ascension rituals of Rast, Zolani, Verus, and Setaka. According to him, it was his role in the rituals that eventually led to his own ascension. Here he says he became a silver-winged god, this being the form we see in the Truth comic. Zaahen's writer, Riot Orchidian, confirmed that the species that his ascended form is based on is not from the real world. She also said that a nod to it can be found in his lore. So with Zaahen calling himself a silver-winged god, I think it's very likely that his form was based on a silver-winged raptor, the griffin-like creatures that we've come to associate with Demacia, obviously foreshadowing his fate as centuries later he would take the body of a Demacian. Zaahen loved his kin.
My chest swelled with love for them, for the king we were to be. I hoisted my glaive and vowed to fight beside them, to guard the light that made us.
According to Riot Orchidian, he considered himself a mentor or guiding figure to the God Warriors. But as we know, this light didn't last forever. The countless wars, including the brutal one against the Horrors of the Void, left scars on the minds of the God Warriors, traumas that would never leave them. And when Shurima fell, they were left without a leader and without a purpose. They began to teach themselves forbidden sorceries and started conquering the world. And so, they became known as the Darkin. We don't know what Zaahen did during this time, if he also waged chaos across the world or not. All we know is that he was present in the Great War that followed. After centuries of an uneasy alliance, the Darkin inevitably turned against one another, and so began the Great Darkin War. Thankfully for the mortals, the host of the aspect of Twilight intervened, giving them the knowledge to bind the Ascended inside their own weapons. This knowledge also reached Zaahen, though how exactly remains a mystery. What we do know is that he felt responsible for the fate of his brothers and sisters, likely because of his involvement in their immortality. This is one of the most important aspects of his character, this sense of guilt, of failure. This is why he turned against his kin, despite how much that broke his heart. He still showed them mercy, begged them to join his side and return to the light, despite knowing they wouldn't listen. We know that during this time, he both slayed some of his kin and sealed others inside their weapons. Riot Orchidian said, "I like to think killing them was a last resort, and if he could seal them away with an iota of hope that they could be different in the future, he would take it." This leads us to the Myth comic, where we see glimpses of the Darkin War in Ionia as told from the perspective of Yunara, at the time the Kinku's Feast of Shadow. Zaahen arrives in Ionia, slaying a Darkin and an entire army alone. Zaahen offered to ally himself with the Kinku, to help protect Ionia from his brothers, and for almost 3 years Zaahen fought alongside them. Together, and with the knowledge Zaahen brought from Shurima, they were able to bind some of the Darkin into their weapons. These included Rast, Verus, and Zolani. Pra is also mentioned in Yunara's bio, and while we never get a confirmation that he was also imprisoned during this time, given where he ended up, I think it's safe to assume that was the case. We get glimpses of his fight with Rast in his story. They fought for many days and nights. With every wound they drew, Rast roared with joy. Zaahen saw how far his brother had fallen as his responsibility. He had failed to guide him. During this fight, both Rast and Zaahen used Emomancy to heal their wounds. Riot Orchidian commented, "He has some lifesteal / self-healing in his kit, and I think it's important to narrativize that. I think he's the kind to seek to stop the Darkin by any means necessary, even if that means putting himself at risk of corruption. Him having this power was also meant to reinforce the dichotomy of divine and profane, ascended and Darkin, something also important for his character." Rast asks Zaahen to join him and the others, and a part of Zaahen wishes he could.
"I cannot deny the whisper within that wants nothing more. If I turn against this world, I will be lost to fury, to bloodthirst, to the fall of Arcane, but at least we'll be lost together. If we turn against this world as one, none could stop us."
He experienced the same trauma as his brothers. He too can feel the temptation of surrendering himself to madness, but unlike his brothers, he still believes they can be better than that, and if they can't, they must be stopped, for the sake of what they once were, what they once stood for.
"If the Darkin cannot be saved, then we must be silenced."
Despite Zaahen being considered one of the most dangerous Darkin, he had honored his alliance with the Kinku, and helped save the First Lands. So, when the war ended, the Eye of Twilight allowed him to live in peace. However, he could feel his humanity ebbing away. He feared what one day he could become, and so he asked to be bound like his brothers and hidden away where no mortal could easily find him. And so he was sealed inside his glaive within the Temple of Twilight. The temple was then cast into the Spirit Realm, with Yunara pledging to stand guard over it for all time. Zaahen feels very guilty of Yunara's fate, as the Darkin War and its aftermath took away everything she had, and later Zaahen would take her newfound friend as well. Here in the Spirit Realm is where they would remain for centuries, but this is not the story the Ionians would remember. As canon says, to help them recover from the war, it was better to let them remember a wholesome fable than the painful truth. And this is how the legend of the devoted shrine Maiden came to be. In this tale, the Darkin were spirits that guarded Ionia. At first they were believed to be Kenmei, benevolent spirits, but in time their true nature began to seep out from behind their masks, and Ionia fell into chaos. A humble shrine maiden prayed to the patron Kenmei of her temple's shrine. At first, he refused to help her, but once he learned about the nature of Ionia's enemies, he joined the maiden in her quest. Together they fought to protect Ionia, in what would be known as the War of the False Kenmei. They managed to purge all traces of the dark spirits from the land, putting an end to this war. Then the Great Spirit confessed that he had lied to the maiden, for he was no different from those they fought. Fearing he would not overcome his nature, he chose to leave the mortal realm. The maiden, refusing to abandon the Great Spirit, joined him in exile. And this is how Ionia remembers the Great Darkin War. As you can see, it's a lot different than what actually happened. Here, I want to point out how the Great Spirit, who represents Zaahen, looks surprisingly similar to what Zaahen would look like once he took over Shin's body. Makes me wonder if someone in the Kinku knew this would happen, and shaped the perception of Zaahen so that Ionians in the future would recognize him as the Great Spirit from the tale. But this is just speculation on my part. Now we can finally jump to the present, 15 centuries later. Despite being the most important character in the lore of the seasons we got in 2025, Zaahen himself doesn't do much. So, and because I assume you already know much of the story anyway, I'll try to keep this part brief. This chapter begins with LeBlanc's interest in the Darkin Glaive. Why? It's still unclear, but Twilight's end suggests that she might have been looking for a way to permanently destroy demons in order to stop Swain and Rome. To learn about the location of the weapon, she summoned Atakhan, an ancient demon who once served Mordekaiser. How the demon knew about the glaive's location, we do not know. LeBlanc also had a host planned for the glaive, but Vladimir threw a wrench in her plans. It's very likely, though not confirmed, that following this, she decided Shin would be the host instead. There are hints that she was behind Shin's journey to Ionia, but again, nothing has been confirmed for certain. What we know for sure is that a spirit blossom flower bloomed in Demacia, and this led Shin to return to his homeland. Here he met Canon, who stayed with Shin until the Temple of Twilight suddenly returned to the mortal realm. We don't know exactly why this happened, but we know that it had something to do with a wild bloom, the same phenomenon behind the spirit blossoms blooming outside of Ionia. Alongside the temple came Yunara, but also many demons. Shin and Yunara followed these demons to protect the Ionians nearby. This, however, was just a distraction to lure them away from the temple, so that Atakhan and LeBlanc could get inside. When this happened, the temple returned to the spirit realm. Following this, Shin had a dark vision, a future where the Darkin had taken over Demacia and destroyed it. It's after sharing this vision with the Kinku members that they revealed the real story of the Darkin in Ionia, as Shin only knew the legend. Having heard the truth, he decides to help them against those that seek the glaive. To get inside the temple, Shin and Yunara had to pass the trials of Twilight. For Shin, these manifested in visions of his past, visions that once again turned into a nightmarish future thanks to LeBlanc. Shin concludes that to defeat the Darkin he has to wield one of their weapons. This is likely what LeBlanc intended when she gave him these visions. But Zaahen intervenes, warning Shin that the Darkin weapon is not the answer he seeks. Riot Orchidian said the following: "I like to think that as Shin was learning about the nature of the Darkin, Zaahen had learned a bit about him too. I'll say this, in those trials, Shin saw the collapse of his kingdom/home, the corruption of his fellows, and his failure to protect his leader. Yes, those fears belong to Shin, but do they only belong to him? In Zaahen's case, these were more than just fears. These actually happened to him. The vision ends and Shin finds himself with Yunara inside the temple. The following moments were depicted in the cinematic Twilight's End. Shin and Yunara fight Atakhan and LeBlanc, but are overpowered. As Atakhan impales Shin, he sees no other option but the Darkin glaive. Upon touching it, he is able to commune with the god warrior inside, with Zaahen. The latter still sees himself as too dangerous, and he tries to convince Shin to give up. But Shin refused, saying that Zaahen's power was going to be used for evil, even if he didn't want to. He begged the Shuriman to let him sacrifice himself so that Zaahen's power wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. As painful as that was for him, Zaahen agreed, taking over Shin's body and killing him in the process. Worth noting that despite Shin being gone, Zaahen still has access to his memories. Zaahen defeats Atakhan and LeBlanc, ending this year's lore, though from his voice lines we know that his purpose remains the same: to hunt his kin and keep the world safe from them while trying to stay sane after countless centuries of trauma and corruptive powers. If you want to learn more about this, again I recommend my video on his voice lines. And so this was everything we know about Zaahen. Definitely a very interesting addition to the Darkin family. He's the only one who hasn't succumbed to madness. Thank you so much for watching until the end. As always, let me know down below if I missed anything, and also let me know your thoughts on Zaahen and his lore. And consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next video.